Question time was suspended today to allow the New Zealand Prime Minister John Key the rare honour of addressing both houses of Parliament. I spoke with John Key earlier. Prime Minister, welcome to 7:30.
Thanks very much.
Now, we've seen all of the horrifying pictures out of Christchurch. We've seen aftershocks just in the last week. Can you put some sort of human scale on this for us?
Well, it's very tough on the people of Christchurch. It's our second largest city. In the 9 months that we've had the earthquakes taking place there's been around about 7,400 aftershocks of a magnitude of 3 or greater on the Richter scale. So you can imagine that undermines the confidence of people. And I think when we had those big aftershocks last week, which were very significant aftershocks, I mean, really for a lot of people, they felt, look, enough's enough, we just want this to be over. That said, the government and I think the people of Christchurch are very committed to the rebuild of Christchurch. We will put that city back together again, but it's a frustrating process for them and it will have a big impact on them.
How long will it take and how much will it cost?
Yeah, so in terms of cost, that's maybe slightly easier to quantify. To put it in perspective, in terms of a natural disaster in a developed economy, this is the single largest event that we can find as a percentage of GDP. So it costs about 8 to 9% of GDP, around about 25 billion New Zealand dollars. If you look at the Japanese earthquake and tsunami, as horrific as it was, it still cost around about 3 to 5% of GDP. So it's a big impact on our economy. In terms of the rebuild, I would say 5 to 6 years of very aggressive building, and we're working through that process. I mean, that has an economic stimulation effect actually in Christchurch, which is remarkable, and across the rest of New Zealand, but it's a big job.
But you'd have to go into debt for that, and you were already in suffering some economic problems after the global financial crisis.
Yeah, so what we did in Budget 2011 was we went into that, notwithstanding that it's election year, with a zero budget. So we promised no additional expenditure, and we paid for fully our expected share of the liability of the Christchurch earthquake. So about $5.5 billion was provisioned in the budget. We're lucky in New Zealand, we have a lot of insurance and reinsurance, so that'll pick up what we think is the bulk of everything else. So that was the good news part of the story in the sense that we've paid for the cost of it. We're making tremendous savings in other parts of our economy to pay for that, but we're in quite good shape there. Economically, we're actually starting to come right. I mean, our confidence numbers are rising. When we were the government, we came in at the end of 2008 and the country had 3 quarters of recession. The view from Treasury was quite negative. They said 10 years of deficits, debt probably topping out at around about 60% of GDP. So in reality, we've done much better than that.
One area where you're ahead of Australia is on carbon pricing. You do have an emissions trading system that's in place now and will be extended up until 2015. How important is it that Australia comes on board with something similar?
Well, we always look at what happens around the world. I mean, in the end, what happens in Australia is a matter for Australia, but nevertheless, our two economies are closely aligned, and so it does matter what happens in Australia to New Zealand. I mean, we think our emissions trading scheme is working. When we became the government, we substantially reduced the cost of that on consumers. So we think it costs around about $150 a household. We do think we're seeing positive outcomes. So in terms of new electricity generation, that is totally coming now from renewables. And we are seeing more trees being planted, so afforestation is positive. So we think that's good.
Was it predicated on the idea that Australia would price carbon?
Actually, what we did was we picked up a lot of what is in the Australian scheme. So when we became the government, the previous New Zealand Labor government had a scheme that was quite different and actually we thought didn't allow for growth and didn't allow for the sort of fundamentals of our emissions profile. So we picked up a lot of what's in the CPRS and a lot of the technical facts of that. So yeah, I mean, look, we're constantly looking at what Australia's doing.
One final point on this, does it make it more difficult if Australia doesn't price carbon?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, Australia's one factor of a number of factors. We've got our own review taking place. So we have carbon priced, capped at the moment at a price of $12.50 in New Zealand, so about $10 Australian a tonne. The review takes place at the moment, and so we'll have those results by in a month or two. One of the factors we're looking at is to see what the rest of the world's doing.
Both Australia and New Zealand have been badgering Fiji for some time now to return to a more democratic way of doing business. We seem to be having no effect at all.
Yeah, I think it's in the true Pacific way, these things are never quick. And in Fiji's case, they've had 4 coups really in the last 20-odd years. So I think all of us know that we need Fiji to get itself on a much firmer footing, and they do have to have a democracy that works for them. And I don't think either Australia or New Zealand have argued that there isn't the need for reform in Fiji. It's the process of the way that Frank Bainimarama has put himself in charge of the country. From our point of view, and like Australia, we continue to have some sanctions on that regime, but they're quite modest, really. They're travel sanctions, so that will have some impact, for instance, on the Rugby World Cup in terms of the team that Fiji can send. It certainly annoys the regime, but it's really about the only thing we can do. We continue to see their economy deteriorate. Their sugar sector's in very poor shape. We worry about the plight of everyday Fijians, so we're trying to get the balancing act right there.
China is spending a lot of money in Fiji. In fact, China's spending a lot of money through the Pacific. Are you concerned by that?
Well, I guess the point is we can't necessarily stop that. What we do try and do is have discussions with the Chinese about how we can work constructively with them in the Pacific. We think and we understand that part of the world very well. About 1 in 10 New Zealanders come from a Pacifica background, so we have good relationships there and long entrenched history of those countries. Ultimately, I think that's part of the shift in the power base that you're seeing, to a certain degree from the west to the east, as China becomes a bigger force and a bigger player in every aspect of the global economy.
And do you see China's role in the Pacific as benign?
I don't know. Look, that's something, we hope that their intentions are the right ones. I think that they are just expanding their overall footprint. I don't think it's unique, actually, to the Pacific. You're seeing them in Africa and lots of other parts of the world. As I say, all we can do is try and work constructively with them and give them our input on what we think is important. And we think we're making some progress there.
New Zealand banned live exports in 2004 after what we saw with the Australian live sheep trade to Egypt. Can you ever imagine that New Zealand would reopen live exports?
I think that's very unlikely. We certainly see countries in the Middle East that want to have the live exports of sheep from New Zealand, but given the contentious nature of that and the steps that New Zealand took some years ago, I think it's extremely unlikely.
Australia needs workers. Obviously, New Zealand has some problems with its economy. Are you concerned that we might see more of a drift of New Zealanders into Australia? Well,
over the last 30 or 40 years, you've seen quite an exodus of New Zealanders into Australia, and they've added to your skill set and played a pretty constructive role in your economy. We're doing everything we can to try and keep them in New Zealand or encourage them back, or indeed encourage Australians to come back to New Zealand.
And what's the old joke? Increase the IQ of both countries?
Yeah, well, that was what Rob Muldoon famously joked, I think.
Well, finally, and most importantly, I'd say for New Zealand, can you win the World Cup at home?
Absolutely we can. Last time we hosted it in 87, we won it there. We've got a great team. But, as we know in World Cups, anything can happen. And those Wallabies, they look pretty strong. Their backline's very fast.
And what happens if you don't win it at home?
Well, we've got an election on November 26th, so ask me that question on November 27th.
Will you get blamed?
Probably. But I'll see how it goes. I actually think that team is a very strong team. Richie McCaw's a great captain, with great faith in the All Blacks, and hopefully they'll bring home the bacon.
Prime Minister, thank you.
Thank you.